Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, February 1st, 2022. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, David Dayen, executive editor of The American Prospect, on how neoliberalism broke the supply chain. Also on the program today, U.S. and Russia clash at the UN Security Council, trying to find a way to avoid a war. EPA will resume its limits on the release of mercury in a Trump reversal. So sorry for those of you who want a little more mercury in your air. The FDA gives Moderna full approval. Pfizer for kids 6 months and up could be available in weeks. Amnesty International releases a new report. Israel is an apartheid regime. Single-payer bill pulled from the California floor. The last moment foreclosing any opportunity for single-payer in California this year. New York Times reports that Trump personally sought to have the DHS seize ballot boxes. Boris Johnson slammed in a new report showing he flouted COVID restrictions. And Pence's former chief of staff testifies in front of the January 6th commission. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for joining us. Glad to have you here. Also, of course, here with me today is Emma Vigeland. Emma, hello. Welcome.
Hi.
How are you?
Switching it up. I don't know. Doing good.
No, I understand. I'm trying to get my IMs going, and I can't seem to do it for some reason on Adium. So it's not, I don't know. We'll see what's going on there.
Portentous.
Yes. Great to have you here, folks. Thanks for joining us. We'll be talking to David Dayen in a moment. At the moment on Capitol Hill, starting to talk about funding the government. You remember last time we hit the funding deadline, they punted with a continuing resolution. That continuing resolution is, I think it's like 2 or 3 weeks away from expiring. The other issue is, of course, that there is an attempt to break up Build Back Better into smaller components and sew them back up and get them passed through reconciliation. We mentioned the other day that Premier Jayapal has a sense of what Joe Manchin will sign off on, and as he is the King of the United States, we need to have his blessing. Speaking of his blessing, the other issue is that Stephen Breyer, of course, has announced his retirement. The Senate is now faced with confirming whoever Joe Biden ends up picking. That process should happen very rapidly. I think if you have any sense of the age of the typical U.S. senator, or at least the Democratic Senate caucus, once that person's confirmed, Breyer can stay on the court until his resignation. It's sort of, I guess, begs the question, couldn't Biden confirm 4 justices and just wait until the rest go away?
Make a
I
queue.
don't know. I guess that's not how it works.
It's like it's their draft picks and they're in the prospect pool.
I mean, I'm not sure if it. I guess maybe it requires someone to say that they're going to, they're going to retire. I'm not exactly sure how that works.
I bet Trump could get it done.
Yeah, indeed.
Right.
But here is Joe Manchin, President of the United States, being asked how he feels about President Biden's narrow criteria for an upcoming Supreme Court pick. Let me tell you something. These slots on the court have had traditions for certain genders and ethnicities for decades.
Or religions before that.
Well, religions, yeah. I mean, in fact, this slot was typically the Jewish slot. I think there was one break in that from, since I think it was from Brandeis. But of course, Kagan is on the court, and Biden's under no obligation for this. But the idea that this is in somehow like a unique situation is absurd.
Well, we laid that out yesterday.
We did.
Republican presidents have had criteria for the identities of their judges for the past few decades.
Well, let's be honest. Presidents have had specific ideas of the identities of Supreme Court picks since the first Supreme Court.
Right.
And it just happens that for 120 years it was white men, maybe more actually, white Protestant men.
And in recent history, the Republican criteria is if you identify as a Heritage Foundation acolyte. So,
right.
I mean, that's a 100% hit rate in that area.
Federalist Society, you're in. Gorsuch and Kavanaugh down to the same high school. Nevertheless, here's Joe Manchin from West Virginia being asked about this narrow requirement.
Are you in favor of having a quick nomination process or confirmation
Well,
process?
I'm just in favor of basically filling the court. I make sure we don't have a vacancy there for any time at all. So, yes, absolutely, let's move forward. A lot of the people have been vetted, so we're looking for a good, qualified, competent, rule of law person, and I think there's quite a few that have been mentioned, so I'm anxious to see who the president brings forward, and we'll go through the process, judiciary, then we'll pass it on to us, the full body, and then we'll vote. I'm anxious to do that.
Do you think it would make sense to have this go as fast as the confirmation process did for the last open seat on the court?
Well, it depends on the qualifications of the person. That's the main thing. If you have somebody that's already been vetted, it goes pretty quick. Mm-hmm. So if not, then it goes in a deep dive, and this is the highest court in the land, so it takes time to make sure you get the right person, but there's a lot of qualified people who have been mentioned so far, and I'm sure they're all good people.
Have you spoken to the White House at all about the list?
No, I'm anxious. I just think we need to make sure that we have a full court of 9.
What do you think about the narrow net that he's cast? Just eliminate it to black women?
Oh, I think it basically represents, you must represent basically who we are as a nation. I think it's far beyond time, It's time to do it. Okay?
Thanks, Senator.
All right, so good for Joe Manchin. He wasn't going to take the bait there, of course. I mean, frankly, it was an incredibly offensive question in and of itself. So narrow. But an indication as to maybe where Manchin is there by saying if someone's already been vetted, that'll make the process go a lot quicker. Ketanji Brown Jackson was nominated and confirmed a year ago for I think she's now on the Court of Appeals
in D.C.
Circuit Court, and she had been confirmed for a district court, I believe, during the Obama administration. Not sure exactly which year it was. So in other words, she's had Senate confirmation. She's passed the Senate before, already been vetted. However, there are some corporatists out there who are looking for a judge who is going to be maybe fulfill sort of some of the requirements that Joe Biden has, but will continue to protect corporate interests. I give you Representative Jim Clyburn pushing an anti-labor judge.
J. Michelle Childs. That's her name.
I just know Michelle, and she has a kind of background that will offer some diversity to this court. Today, in the last 50 years, there's never been a person that served on the Supreme Court of the United States that's a graduate of a public school, undergraduate or law school. What's this notion that if you don't go to a public school, that you are not qualified? Here's a person with 4 degrees, all from Southern schools. Her zip code disqualifies her. I really believe that we got to get beyond this notion of elitism. There are a lot of people who graduate from public schools, including the current president of the United States of America, who ought to be considered for high office. And so I just think that this thing has built up and it's bothering a lot of people, including yours truly.
That's really cynical because,
oh my God.
I mean, I am in full agreement that the orthodoxy with which our government officials treat someone who comes out of Yale Law School or someone who comes out of Harvard Law School or Columbia, I mean, it's ridiculous. And there's elitism in that in and of itself. But he's hiding the ball here and cloaking it on purpose in this because this J. Michelle Childs, the federal judge Jim Clyburn is urging Biden to name to the Supreme Court, worked for years as an anti-union law firm that boasted it helped companies remain union-free. Childs often defended employers sued in racial discrimination cases. The Prospect article on this said that 23 out of the 25 cases she was on with this law firm was not on the side of the people accusing discrimination, the companies of discrimination. She was representing the corporations in those instances. I mean, she's as anti-union in terms of her background as it can get, and anti-worker just in general.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the one requirement, except maybe a few exceptions for Supreme Court justices, whatever they are, make sure they're down to coerce workers using the full force of law. And I hate to be like a Jordan Peterson. Let's get some viewpoint diversity and not only look to certain kinds of diversity, but it would be nice if that was the thing we started with, is this person is a pro-worker, and then we can get like a black woman on who's pro-worker, not somebody who has a pedigree of union busting. It's disgusting.
And you can find that.
And sorry to cut you off, but like the problem with Clyburn saying like this public school thing, like that, the reason people like that stuff is it's a proxy for these class politics. It's like but Clyburn's saying basically like, oh, we can get a black woman from a non-Ivy League education that's willing to crush unions as well.
I mean, the point exactly, and this point is really important, that when we talk about identity and diversity being important in terms of identity, it is a proxy because it presumably means that the likelihood of them being pro, let's say, union or worker, or have a diversity of experience that might lend them to appreciate that they need to fight on behalf of 99% of the people. That's the point. The idea that you can go to a public school and then become essentially a crony to suppress workers' rights, unions, you name it. I don't know, so fight against environmental protections. I mean, we can go on and on. Be in favor of monopolization. I mean, on and on and on. The value of a signifier of going to public schools is that ostensibly they have not been bathed in the ideology of the elite. It doesn't, but it's not it's not definitive.
No. It's not a virtue in and of itself. It is what is created by those experiences. Presumably.
Right.
And of course, someone like Clyburn and Lindsey Graham, by the way, and Tim Scott, who all like her and are all pushing her, that should tell you everything. They are using the fact that she went to a public school in order to push the exact opposite of what that's supposed to engender.
If there is a single moment where a single synapse fires within any individual in the Biden administration, that it is going to behoove them to have bipartisan support for this nominee, they are clinically insane. And I'm not a doctor, and so I don't, I rarely go out on a limb like that, but they're out of their minds. All right. In just a moment, we will have David Dayen, the executive editor of that same magazine that wrote that piece about exposed Clyburn's push for a union-busting lawyer on the Supreme Court. But we have some big news, ladies and gentlemen.
Whoop.
Let's see what we got here.
Charge.
This is an official announcement of another live date for the Majority Report. Now, here's the deal. We had had this one in the works to book when we thought the Boston show was January 16th. And then the Boston show got moved to May. And we're working on some great stuff for the Boston show. I got to tell you, I just... it's pretty exciting. I haven't even told you guys about this yet. But we now have a date for a show in a place called Brooklyn, New York. It's at the Bell House. It's going to be March. When is it? Shoot. 23rd?
26th?
26th?
Last Saturday in March.
The last Saturday in March, as we call it. If you go to MajorityLive.com now, you'll see there are 2 dates. Now, listen, here's the deal. The Bell House is about a half to a third the size of the Wilbur. The Wilbur in Boston is nearly sold out. It is at 2 p.m., March 26th in Brooklyn. There's only about 300 seats, maybe? It's going to sell out quick.
We've done, was it 2 MRs there?
Yeah.
And I think I did 2 TMBSs there, and everyone has been basically sold out.
Yep. So you got to move on this quick. Got to be quick.
Gotta be quick. I went to see a comedy show there, and I got a bunch of margaritas, and it was probably the worst hangover of my life.
It's a fun place to drink.
So just be careful with any margaritas there, but otherwise we're gonna have a good time.
And we're 2 months out, and by then I think we're going to be now. Of course, vaccination will be required, and I believe their policy at this point is, masking when you're not eating or drinking. Who knows what the situation will be in March at that time, but I would presume that that's going to be the case. It might be if things are really, really calm in Brooklyn by that time, which I think is very possible. Maybe mask will be optional. We'll see. But March 26th, 2 p.m., the Bell House. Go to MajorityLive.com. You can check it out. Also, as always, this show relies on your support. You can become a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. I've gotten a couple of emails about this. We will play that clip about Joe Rogan. That was on, what was that? Hayes' show last night. Okay, now, want to welcome to the program. Welcome back to the program. Oh, there he is. He's already there. The executive editor of the American Prospect, David Dayen. David, welcome back. I'm here with Emma, as you can see.
Happy New Year. Am I still allowed to say that in February? Because I haven't said it to you.
Yes. That's not true. We've had you on this year.
I don't think so.
I don't think we have.
Oh, well, I was waiting for your video, your Wi-Fi to get improved.
I know you got your new.
I see it has.
No, it's installed and your landline's gone. Remember that was the last. I don't know why you wouldn't remember that.
Welcome to.
You remember that?
Yeah, I remember that.
Welcome to the 21st century. Now, listen, there's I want to talk about, you guys have a huge issue on the supply chain. I want to get to that. I also want to ask you at one point about the California single payer situation. I know that you follow California politics. We can get there in a bit. And I imagine you're also busy with some other things these days. But let's go through this. You have you've dedicated it. Well, I guess it's going to be a rolling series. How does it work in this era of the internet when you have like an issue of this?
Right. So we put out a special issue that should be arriving, for our print subscribers in mailboxes, in the coming days, entirely about the supply chain mess. And what we're going to do online is every day. We started yesterday. Every day for 2 weeks, we're going to put out one of the main pieces from the issue, and it really follows this along from where we begin with the supply chain, which is production of factories, through ocean shipping, through the ports, through rail, through trucking, through warehouses, through retail, through commodities, and all showing the exact same dynamics, that the policies of the last 40 years of globalization, monopolization, financialization, deregulation, and just-in-time logistics created hidden risk that made the supply chain vulnerable, and it blew up in the pandemic. And this was a deliberate policy choice to sacrifice resiliency for corporate profits and also the alleged bounty of low prices. We made this trade-off to make our supply chains incredibly vulnerable. And now we don't even get the low prices because the supply chain broke. So that's the entire issue, and we take it step by step by step.
And there was one other element, I think, from what I've read from so far that you guys have put out. It's an increase in profits for the shareholders and the C-suite, right? I mean, it's not just we traded resiliency off for efficiency and lower prices. It's because it raises profits.
Oh, absolutely. So,
right.
We located our factories abroad because it would have cheap labor and environmental standards, so it would be lower cost. The shipping costs raised as a result, so what we had to do was deregulate all of those areas to make trucking a really terribly low-paid job, to make rail very cheap and lacking in manpower and security. We did just-in-time logistics because anytime you hold something in inventory, you're not making money off it. And so the philosophy was have low, lean inventories, get everything from one place to the next only when it's needed, and we'll be able to move forward. All of these things were in service to Wall Street. All of these things were in service to shareholders. And it completely discounted and ignored the fact that if any disruption occurred in this process, that it would magnify and ripple out all over the world. And that's exactly what we're seeing right now with over the last 2 years with the pandemic.
All right, so let's go through some of this. I mean, one of the sort of, I guess and I don't know if this was the first, where these fall in the context of sort of how these are sequenced, but China is a big part of this. And not so much, I mean, in part, I guess what what they've been doing, but really as it's an example of what happened here. I mean, China was sort of like the repository of a lot of the conclusion of a lot of the policies. At one point you say, you write, I think it's in the original piece, that foreign sources create a path dependence. That's what this is about ultimately, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's in Bob Kuttner's piece on China that is out today, actually, and you can read that at prospect.org. Yeah, I mean, the issue is that not only do we have a lot of finished goods that are dependent on Chinese production, but a lot of the component parts are also dependent that way. So even if you have U.S. production of certain finished goods, the components are all coming from China, and they're relying on that supply chain to bring that over. And so any kind of disruption there is going to create chaos. And because of that reliance, it also creates that path dependency, because the companies who even are domestically oriented, who make their goods here in America, need the smooth flow of free trade from China in order to finish their goods. And so they become part of the China lobby to lower tariffs, to eliminate any kind of national security restrictions on Chinese imports. And so the whole thing kind of builds on itself. And what's really interesting, actually, is in the last year, it is not just COVID that has created the disruptions to production in China. In fact, more so, it's extreme weather events. So the Yangtze River flooded in 2020, and that created a lot of shutdowns at ports and production facilities. An extreme heat wave in China created more use of air conditioning, and because of the various rules and regulations in China, created a complete energy crisis that shut down electricity production at factories and led to a slowdown in production. So the idea is, because I've heard things thrown around, well, how much more do you want goods to cost just so we can stop a once in a century pandemic? But that's not the only thing that can disrupt supply chains. You could have extreme weather. You can have freak events like earthquakes or fires. You can have political unrest. The problem is the engineering itself. A plumber who made a system like this would be fired because there is the engineering is way too vulnerable to one single point of failure destroying the entire system, and that's what we're seeing.
But what would make you think that we're going to have more extreme weather events?
Well, I mean, ironically, one of the reasons why multinational corporations chased lower costs abroad is because they wanted lower environmental standards, right? The ability to pollute at a cheaper quantity. So
there's a feedback loop here.
There's a feedback loop. Ironically, it's the very search for low environmental standards that is creating the weather crises that is breaking the supply chain. So yeah.
Is there one, well, when you're looking at this, I imagine, you're all on a Zoom meeting as you start to divvy up the different sectors that people are working on and the different elements, right? There's two different elements, or I would imagine multiple elements, but there are several different planes in which you examine this, both, from a geographic location, also from a product location. You can look at it in terms of the various sets of policies. Is there a couple of products that you think demonstrate the wide range of problems that led to this, right? Because there's an ideological umbrella over all of this in many respects, but there are different elements to it, like you say, financialization, deregulation, just in time.
I mean, let's walk through it. We can walk through it at the product level, or we can just walk through it at the level of these ideas, these theories. But semiconductors is one that people talk about a lot, and that has created a serious goods inflation and shortages, particularly in the auto sector, but also in medical technology, which is a story we read about today. The semiconductor sector is very concentrated in terms of production. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation, or TSMC, creates a large amount of the semiconductors available that go out to the rest of the world, especially certain types. And the main competitor for that is this company in Japan. And there was a fire at a Japanese factory that makes semiconductors. So just one random fire, like, removed all of the reserve capacity for semiconductor production globally. And this is an input, once again. So even if it's a US factory and we have a US supply chain or a US production facility, the supply chain is international and they need Taiwan to keep producing. Now, Taiwan also sits in an area of the world where it's threatened by Chinese domination, and that could happen at any moment, and that would completely change the game even further for the production of semiconductors around the world. So you have offshoring that is a major factor here. Then you actually get into the moving of that good. So, we have stuff in China, we need to get it to the United States. Global shipping has become a very concentrated business. And when these production disruptions occurred, suddenly people needed goods and were willing to pay a premium for them. So the net profit of global shipping companies, of which there are really 10, but they segment themselves into alliances, they call themselves, that are really 3. There's really 3 global shipping alliances. Their net profits in 2021 were more than the combined net profits of those alliances in the years 2010 to 2020 combined.
So let's be clear. So in 1 year, they made 10 years worth of profits.
That's right. That's right. And they subsequently, if you think about this, where is the incentive on the part of the ocean shipping industry to fix this problem? Because they are making incredible sums of money off of this chaos. And
now see, this is now, okay, let's just hang in here with shipping for a minute, because originally I had heard, and I guess it was maybe a year ago or so, I somehow at an outdoor, barbecue, ran into someone who was a shipping broker. And I think she had told me at the time that a big part of this was a function of all the containers were sent to places that they don't normally go to because they were sending PPE to various places, far-flung places around the globe that didn't normally have a use for this amount of containers, because they get shipped to one place, and then products that come from that place get shipped to somewhere else. And it's basically just a pattern that goes back and forth. And there's some type of there's a pattern to it.
That's certainly part of it. That is certainly part of it. And there's a misalignment not only of containers, but also chassis, which are the part of the truck that you put the container on.
Right.
And those are also owned and controlled by the shipping companies largely. And so any kind of shortages on both of those is going to affect this. The problem is that this became lucrative.
Well, that's part, because then we're like, if presumably, right, like the reason why prices are being raised, is this just a question of it's price gouging, right? I mean, that's basically what's going on. I mean, I understand the concept of
supply and demand.
Well, yes. But I've got a shipping container that is in a place that is going to be that much more expensive to come back, because there's nobody using it to put anything into it when I'm bringing it back to New York, let's say, for instance. It's coming from, I don't know where, but it's coming back to New York, and it's going to come back empty. And so the value of that shipping container, somebody has to subsidize that. And it's not by anybody who's making any money with the product that's in there. So in this instance, they're just raising their rates because they can, essentially.
I mean, that's certainly part of it. It's also the case that they have to account for the fact that they maximize their profits by making the ships bigger. So that you go one from Shanghai over to Los Angeles and Long Beach, you have a ship that's like as big as the Empire State Building, and that's more cost effective than if you have a smaller ship and you send several of them at once. So every time you do that, it changes the time frame in terms of when you can get back and forth, and it also changes the number of ports in the United States where we've had severe underinvestment, where you can actually, dock a ship like that. This is why LA and Long Beach, which is one complex, they're kind of next to each other, about 40% of all seaborne imports come into one port. So it's forcing a bottleneck. It's creating this mismatch, this situation. And, to an extent that there's nowhere even to put the empty containers. They've had to stack them inside residential neighborhoods. So
how would you deal with that specifically? I mean, could you say, look, Long Beach is only allowed to issue X number of permits to dock there over the course of a year?
Well, people are coming there, ships are coming there without a permit at all. That's why we have this backlog of 105 ships in the San Pedro Bay. But
could you force the industries to have, you need to have smaller ships?
I think one answer to it is to create more ports with the capacity to actually handle ships of any size.
Okay.
And that's through dredging and actual investment in the ports. We have $17 billion from the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but before that time, ports were at a real low point. We look at a listing of the performance index of 500 ports around the world, and most U.S. ports are in the 300s or less. So there's a particular problem in the United States because, there's this kind of debate over why is inflation happening a little bit worse here in the United States than it is around the rest of the world? And the Larry Summers of the world say it's because of our increase in the American Rescue Plan of fiscal policy and more spending. But it's really because of the decrepit and very peculiar state of our logistics systems. One part of that is the ports, where we haven't invested anything. We found, and this is coming later this week, a 2015 report of the Federal Maritime Commission, which is a commission that was completely defanged in 1998 in something called the Ocean Shipping Reform Act, which we'll go back to that in a second. But this 2015 report said, if we increase the imports into this country by a small amount, we are going to be overwhelmed at our ports. And here's what's going to happen: A, B, C, and D. And A, B, C, and D is exactly what is happening right now. So this was not unknown. 7 years ago, a government report predicted everything that's happening right now. And so the idea to me that this is because of demand situation, or this is because of some other factor, and not the deliberate neglect of our critical systems for logistics and transportation is really crazy to me.
And so, investing in ports makes sense to me, but it also seems to be a doubling down on the global supply chain issues that we've already outlined in this reliance.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right.
We're a long ways away from essentially getting someone like the Biden administration to invest as heavily as we need to in domestic production, but that's also the solution here.
Oh, you're absolutely right. And that would, of course, relieve pressure on this system to produce in a very immediate way. If we had reserve capacity, if we had redundancy within the supply chain, so if there's a problem somewhere, you have another supplier that's available and willing. If we kept more inventory in the United States, so that we weren't doing this just in time, and we didn't need the part on Thursday because we were going to add it to the machine on Friday, that would also help. So all of these things, I think, are parts of a whole, and we do have an entire piece coming later next week on solutions to this. But there's no silver bullet. Yeah, we have to make the ports better, but yeah, we also have to reduce our reliance so that it's not just a dire need to fix these ports for our economic security.
I want to talk a little bit. You mentioned that I think Amazon and maybe it was Tesla were starting their own sort of supply chains. And I had an interesting conversation with a guy at the bike shop. I don't know. Again, this was months ago, maybe, where he was telling me about a specific tire that he was trying to get, and his supplier could not get this tire.
Right.
And he had a good relationship with the supplier, and the supplier, supplied a significant region of bike shops around the country. And this guy has, just a small sort of neighborhood bike shop. And so he said, so at one point I was like, he couldn't get the bike tires. The guy was starting to say, maybe we need to find, some type of replacement for this specific type of bike tire. And he said, I just went on Amazon to see if they had it. And Amazon itself was selling the bike tire. And then he said, I wanted to put in and see how many of these bike tires they had. So he kept upping the amount. And he said, they bought all the bike tires. They control all the bike tires now.
Well,
this specific narrow bike tire, I wasn't familiar with it, but and
I'm not surprised.
Okay, talk a little bit about this concentration.
It's very common. We have a whole piece coming on this issue, that the supply chain crisis has become a consolidating event, particularly for retail. So if you are Jim's bike shop in New York, you're not going to be able to do a whole lot. You're kind of at the mercy of large container ships that are going to get you your bike part to your supplier and then over to you. If you're Amazon, you might have the ability to send your own boat, which they've done. Amazon, Walmart, Home Depot, they have circumvented this by sending their own container ships, sending them to smaller ports like Houston and other places. And more important, Amazon and Walmart in particular have said to their suppliers, okay, you need to supply us first.
Right.
So we have this trickle coming out of the supply chain, right? Most of that trickle is being diverted because the suppliers know, if I lose the Walmart account, I'm done. If I lose the Amazon account, I'm done. And what this does is it raises costs for goods to everybody else, because the only way for the other group of folks to compete is, and the only way for the suppliers to recoup the money they're actually losing by having to force supply the large operators, is by raising prices. So it is a consolidating event, and it is also an inflationary event across the rest of the economy. And we know what the effects of this, of consolidation, are on communities and workers and all those things. The supply chain crisis has become a consolidating event. And it's also, the other problem, of course, is the consolidation within the supply chain itself. I mentioned 3 shipping company alliances. There used to be 40 Class 1 railroads. Now there are essentially 4, 2 handle the East and 2 handle the West. We see throughout the components of the supply chain concentration that creates a situation where the incentives all run in the direction of, let's keep this thing broken so we can raise our profits, rather than let's fix the thing and smooth it out for everybody.
One of the things that I see people sometimes react to when they see, how much of a part of China plays in this story. And again, it's not necessarily like Chinese policy per se, as much as it is China becomes a repository in a way for U.S. companies to get cheaper labor, to avoid any type of environmental constraints, et cetera, et cetera. There is, however, there is also the danger, it seems to me, that China can weaponize this advantage they have. You write about how, or I should say maybe it was Kuttner did, how they weaponized it against Australia at certain times. Mm-hmm. Will you talk about that dynamic? Because this is one of those issues, it seems to me, where there's something for everybody here, right? I mean, if you're concerned about antitrust, this is an antitrust story. If you're concerned that China is going to be a world dominating power, there's a story for you here. If you're concerned about labor practices, you're concerned about the environment, you're concerned about climate change. I mean, there's a hook for everybody here. It's almost like so fractured that nobody can quite get their talons into it in some way, which is why I appreciate the work that you guys are doing with this issue at the Prospect. But talk about what's the dynamic between China and Australia.
Well, I mean, there's no question that when you have one country who makes many of the critical components for electronics that perhaps go into weapon systems, for example, or they make the active ingredients in pharmaceuticals that are critical at a particular moment, or they make most of the world's PPE, which is what we saw at the beginning of the pandemic, that there are sort of national security concerns that are tied up with this mercantilist strategy and the reliance on China as a supplier of these critical goods. And what they've done with Australia, seeking policies that they want and threatening to hold back various goods that are critical to the functioning of Australian society and its economy, is kind of the threat level scenario that some China hawks always talk about. Now you could see this in two ways. Like one is, the Chinese production executives, they want to make money too. Why would they cut off these supplies? But the fact that we've seen it to a small degree in Australia suggests that there is, at least with some of these state-owned enterprises, a willingness to do so, and I think that the risk goes beyond China wielding this as a weapon, because China might not want to cut off the production of PPE around the world, but when Wuhan has to be shut down because of a pandemic or because of flooding in the Yangtze River or whatever, it's the same practice, right? It's functionally the same thing. The shutdown happens. And so the national security risk here comes from any kind of disruption, whether it's state directed or whether it is, a function of some weather event or even freak accident.
And I would say, I mean, look, it's hard to get a sense of where we are, 20, 30 years down the road. But for those of us who are concerned with the concept of a second Cold War with China, or, conflicts over Taiwan, or who knows what it is, the more resilient and self-sufficient we are, the less there is an opportunity for a country like China to try and leverage things and provide fodder for the worst instincts of this country.
And look, this isn't theoretical. There are Defense Department reports on all of this showing the level of reliance on particular goods that are critical. But I would say you don't have to be a China hawk to be necessarily worried about this, because
of course
the system is fragile. Whether it's fragile because you have a country that wants to become a great power and demoralize the United States or cut off the United States or not, is immaterial. The system is fragile anyway, and it's vulnerable to shocks, whether they're state directed or not. So I don't think that you necessarily have to be a China hawk to be worried about this issue. Talk
about the White House report that was released in June about on supply chains. You say that it's actually pretty good. I should also note at this point, because it's just occurred to me, we're wearing the same shirt. And the glasses, I mean, I
think that
I feel like it'd be awkward for me not to acknowledge that at this point.
You know, your wardrobe department has been falling down on the job. This was sent to me this morning. It was sent to me, and I was told this would be differentiated from the host.
I got 3 shirts, and I don't know why we can't get this right, where we can't tell people not to wear one of the 3 shirts that I have.
But David, is that more of like a denim type shirt?
Yes, this is more denim. Yeah.
See,
okay.
You're just
not
blind.
exactly this.
All right.
Sam's just blind. That's
well, that's also true. But I mean, Dave and I both have glasses too. All right, so let's talk. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail it.
I didn't even know that.
I was getting distracted by the fact that I'm looking at you. I'm like, oh, wait a second. All right, so the White House.
Well, one has a beard and one doesn't, so we at least got that.
That's why I had to grow it. So I look like somewhat different from half the guests that we have on this program. All right, so the June report.
Yeah. So I mean, one thing here that's important to realize is that this problem was decades in the making. Like, we created this brittleness, and it could have snapped at any point. It could have snapped under the Obama administration. It could have snapped under the Trump administration. Actually, parts of it did. Like
Sandy's
Hurricane Sandy.
Sandy, there was like New York City was like 2 days away from like not being able to get food. Apparently, at one point.
That's right. And it's a function of the same thing. This is just an elongated version of it. So it could have happened under anyone, and it happened to occur under Biden. And the problem that the Biden administration faces is that there is a near-term urgency for economic reasons, for political reasons, to alleviate some of these problems. But they can't really be alleviated in with that level of acceleration and speed. And ultimately, to solve the problem, you have to do long-term structural things that will not bear fruit immediately, but will be extremely important for our economic security down the road. And the Biden administration is
that's like the sweet spot for something that's never going to get done.
Exactly.
Where, politicians are going to exert political cachet on a return that's going to happen after they leave office.
Right. I mean, but to an extent, they are doing it. I mean, you know, the increase of, for example, semiconductor facilities in the United States. We just had one named by Intel. That's a function of a long-term thinking about, I mean, that Intel facility is not going to come online until 2025, but it is being built, and it's being built. There's probably going to be some federal subsidization as soon as the USICA, or the Competes Act, which is called in the House, passes, that offers some subsidization for building these facilities. There is some stuff that they can do in the short term, but it's a difficult situation. I mean, we tangled this for 40 years, and untangling it is going to be a real problem. But the administration is thinking about these things in long-term structural senses, and they're also thinking about how can we force these markets to behave in some form or fashion through pressure. And we've seen that. Actually, a really good example of that is the meat supply chain. So we've seen middlemen meat processors, which there are like 4 companies that control between 60 and 85% of all production of beef, pork, chicken. And we've seen prices to grocery stores rise 20%. And while prices that they buy these the inputs from ranchers and farmers have been flat or below, right? So, sorry, someone keeps calling me. The Biden administration has talked about this a lot and hammered home. This is price gouging. This is something that we need to investigate, and has sent out its USDA and the Justice Department to investigate it. And so what happened in December, after rising for close to a year, prices of meat fell in December. And it's people say that there is no bully pulpit, but there is, and it can be used to a decent effect to get a handle on the getting rid of the log jams in these particular places. So there are some short-term things, but that report is really more long-term, and it looks at 4 critical sets of goods, and looks to ways in which, through legislative policy and the legislation that's in the House right now, the Competes Act has a very interesting set of monitoring and other types of and subsidies to alleviate supply chain congestion. But it also looks at what the various agencies can do to put forward policies that would stop this. But ultimately, if you're going to fix this, you're going to have to bring some stuff back to the United States for production. You're going to have to bring some critical inputs back to the United States. You're going to have to add capacity and move just in time to just in case. You're going to have to regulate. We haven't talked about the trucking industry, which is this horribly low-paid enterprise that everyone says there's a trucker shortage, but there isn't. There's a good job shortage, and nobody wants to do the job at the price being offered right now. So you have to re-regulate trucking, you have to re-regulate rail, you have to re-regulate ocean shipping, and you have to create a situation where companies are encouraged and through regulation, obligated to act in the public interest rather than the interest of their own shareholders and their own profits.
And you're going to be coming out with more intense description of these solutions in the coming days.
That's right. So if you go to prospect.org/supply chain, you can find every one of these articles. We've put out 2 major ones and 1 smaller one so far. We have a major piece coming every day between now and next Friday, and it systematically, I'm really proud of this, it systematically looks at the issue through all of these different lenses. It's absolutely fascinating. We got some great writers and reporters to work on all this stuff, both from our staff and from outside contributors. And I think at the end of it, it tells a real story about what happened over the last 40 years, how we essentially privatized our supply chains, gave them to corporate executives, and they were completely short-sighted about them, and they broke them. And this is what happened, and this is how we can fix it.
That sounds great, and it is incredibly impressive. I want to just turn to a couple other things. One is we should also say, we are getting to the point where I guess maybe one of the other things I think that you've done there that's really impressive at the Prospect is the day one agenda, which I think we're at the point now where it's starting to be clear that it's going to be day 381 right. Day agenda, right? Or let me do the math here. Wait a second, 581, right? Or something like that. 781, I guess.
How many years left in the Biden administration?
Well, I'm suggesting that they're going to start to do that stuff maybe after the midterms. When they've lost the House and the Senate.
And better to do it before to try to keep the House and the Senate, but mileage may vary.
Well, but I would agree. But they seem to be completely reluctant and fearful of doing anything.
Well, some of these things do take time because of administrative procedure. I think you're going to see, for example, changes to the overtime rules this fall, which will allow more people to be eligible for overtime. We just saw this week federal contract workers get increases in pay to a $15 an hour minimum wage. That's for close to 500,000 workers got a raise this week. There are some things that are being done, not necessarily to my satisfaction, but I do think that organizations like the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the Federal Trade Commission, organizations that are in control of real progressives, are going to be doing significant work, and they're not going to wait until after the midterms to do it. So there are some opportunities here. Obviously, some of the big name opportunities, things like lowering prescription drug prices, canceling student debts, changing the marijuana laws to deschedule marijuana from the list of controlled substances. Those things, I think, are running up against White House resistance.
Interesting. Okay. And lastly, you're in California. I know that in the past, we talked about this back in 2017. You had a good understanding of the dynamic that took place when the California single payer bill got pulled or basically went nowhere. This attempt seemed to be a much stronger one. It had cleared the Appropriations Committee in the Assembly, right? I mean, there was a specific sort of idea on how to tax and pay for the single payer in California, if I'm not mistaken. What was your sense of what happened? And we should say it got pulled last night.
Yeah, I mean, it was stronger, or at least more robust in, as you said, the actual policy itself and how to pay for it and everything. But this was something that was announced at like the beginning of January, and by the relative silliness of the California legislature, there are deadlines for when bills have to pass out of committees and also out of the legislative body. So an assembly bill has to pass the assembly by January 31st. And they put this bill together at like the beginning of January, right? So they had like 3 weeks to I mean, I know that single payer is kind of an always looming issue, and it's not like they had to educate a lot of people, but the financing, that was kind of a new thing, and they're saying, okay, we're going to put this together and we're going to get it passed in a matter of 3 weeks, even though the same entity, the California State Assembly, blocked it last time. So it did not feel like a serious effort to me, where they were trying to build interest and build this is the kind of bill that they call them in California a 2-year bill, where you introduce it in this case in 2021, you educate people for a year about it, and then in 2022 you make the effort to actually try to pass it. And they didn't use 2021, right? They were trying to condense a 2-year bill into 3 weeks. And so that says to me, from a legislative strategy standpoint, wasn't a serious effort. It was a way for certain members of the assembly to, in an election year, show that they are supporters of single payer healthcare. I don't know that it was a real effort to pass it.
Is there any legislators in California who are genuinely interested in trying to get it passed and are going to sort of marshal some type of genuine effort?
I think that remains to be seen. I mean, it took them a while to find someone to even carry this bill. Ash Kalra, who's a state legislator from, I believe, the Central Valley area, is the one who took it on. But the history of single payer in California is that you have one person who carries the bill, and it's their fight that they take on for years and years. So Sheila Kuehl, who was in the legislature in the 2000s, it was her singular fight, and she got it to the Governor Schwarzenegger's desk twice, where it was vetoed. Then Mark Leno took it on, and then Ricardo Lara, who's now our insurance commissioner, took it on, and then they waited forever to get somebody else to carry it forward. So the test now will be is if Kalra keeps on this and decides to use this year, even though it's abandoned effectively in terms of passage, but uses the year to educate his colleagues and say that this is the framework that we need to take, and then takes it on next year, introduces it again as a 2-year bill, so that you have all that time. you almost have a 3-year bill, right? You have this year, 2023 to tell the new legislature about it, and then in 24 maybe you can pass it. So, but that's where we're at right now. And I should say that look, the absence of Governor Newsom from this is not lost on anybody. I mean, he ran on single payer, and he decided not to pursue this in any form or fashion. He is pursuing a more modest reform that would make undocumented folks eligible for Medi-Cal. And that would, and the insurance exchanges, especially now that we have subsidies such that nobody pays more than, I believe, 7% for health insurance. The exchanges have worked pretty well in California, to the extent that there's a pretty low amount of uninsured. But as you know, the system is such that it still creates increases for medical bills, and it doesn't restrain costs to the level that single payer would. So I feel like Newsom deserves to hear about this. He ran on it. Nobody told him that he had to run on it.
Completely run away from it too. I mean, really just pretended like this was not going on. I mean, as far as I can tell from across the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, I know that the state progressive caucus of the state party has said that anybody who didn't support single payer was not going to be someone they endorsed. So now they have to look at that in the context of the governor, although I don't even know if there's a Republican running against the governor this year.
Right.
We'll have to see. But I don't think that the prospects certainly aren't very good, but I think that there's a lot of grassroots energy around it, and that needs to be converted finally into some legislative energy.
David Dayen, I cannot encourage people enough to head over to the Prospect, check out what the solutions are. That's coming out in a couple of days, but also what the problems are to our supply lines. And
also, I should say, we do have shirts there. We have T-shirts and things like that. So if you do need something else to wear, that would be an excellent place for you to start, is our Prospect store.
I will check out the Prospect store, but let me encourage people to go over and support the Prospect and become and sign up and become members. What do you call it? I know that I have a subscription. I guess that's what it is. I have a subscription.
Yeah, you just go to prospect.org/membership. We do have we call it membership, but yeah, we obviously would appreciate everyone's support. This is the stuff that we do, like in this issue, I don't feel like is done anywhere else.
Nowhere.
And so
not even remotely close.
So if you think there's value in what we do, yes, it does cost money to do it, and we would appreciate and welcome your support. And you get some perks, including potentially a new shirt there.
Wait a second, where's my shirt?
Look, I don't run your membership. I don't know what's going on with you.
You expect preferential treatment?
No, I'm a member. I want my shirt. David Dayen, appreciate it. Thanks so much.
All right, thanks a lot.
Bye. I never got a shirt. I just didn't get a shirt.
Well, luckily you know somebody.
Well, he didn't. He seemed to like completely blow it off. The response to my saying I didn't get a shirt is like, hey, you know what? I'll look into it.
Maybe he doesn't think you deserve one.
Yeah, he talks a big game.
Maybe they're careful with the brand.
Yeah.
They don't want you sporting it.
He's sort of Gavin Newsom me. Everybody's going to get a shirt. Oh, where's my shirt? I got to go. The California thing, very disappointing.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not shocking to me. Newsom.
It's not shocking. But it is incredibly disappointing. And you know, we had an opportunity in New York that went by in a blip as well.
And I think it's becoming clear to me that in order to make the Medicare for All movement nationally more sustainable, I think getting wins like that in California and New York are going to be big. before we're talking about this on a national scale.
I mean, possible, but there also needs to be. I mean, there just isn't the broad-based political awareness of it. I mean, I think a candidate like Sanders who could do, at least communicate about it on a national level is helpful. But there needs to be more of that, so that there's a greater, or maybe it's you're back to like maybe a place like Vermont does it, where it's small enough and idiosyncratic enough where you could get away with it and become a model. All that said, we're going to head into the fun half of the program. Don't forget, you can come see the show live in 2 places now, both that start with a B, Boston or Brooklyn. Maybe we'll just do exclusively live shows exclusively at places with a B.
Mm-hmm.
Brattleboro,
Boise,
Burlington,
Birmingham.
I don't know what the Birmingham was.
Birmingham isn't that how they say it in England? They like shorten it, Birmingham.
All right. You say Budapest.
We will be going to Budapest next.
Bucharest.
Okay.
Bismarck.
There we go.
Belarus, that's in the news lately.
Yeah, there
but that's
we go.
not a city.
Great. Nope. Matt, what's happening in the Matt Leckian media universe?
Check out patrons, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. We had Kevin Bird on. He's a radical scientist. We're talking about Stephen Jay Gould and the long fight against genetic determinism. And we get into like how basically it's just scientific rationalism for how we can continue keeping black people down after Jim Crow. And it's still around, folks. So patreon.com/Left Reckoning to get that episode.
Baltimore.
Bismarck.
I'd like to do Baltimore.
Berlin.
Baltimore
I love Baltimore. Baltimore is one of my 5 favorite cities in the country.
Should we have Nomi on? What are the other 4?
New York, LA. Not that interesting. I forget what the other ones are now.
Well, all right. So you have 3 favorite cities.
Well,
New York, LA, Baltimore.
I put it like, I just think it's underrated is all I'm saying. I like Baltimore.
Nomi.
What's up?
Top 5 cities.
Top 5 in the U.S. or everywhere?
U.S.
Okay, just saying. New York, obviously. San Francisco, San Juan, Puerto Rico, definitely an underrated city. Let's see what else. Santa Fe, I think it's kind of cool and fun, and like fun little vibes. I know I'm missing something. Why did you put me on the spot like this?
Because it's my fault.
Tucson, Arizona. I didn't think that because I was born there, but I had friends visit me last year there with my family, and they were like, "This is pretty exceptional as a city." Is that 5?
Yeah, I think it's pretty close.
Chicago should be there because it's an all-star city. I'm gonna throw that in. I'll replace Santa Fe with Chicago.
I'm Minneapolis, Chicago, Seattle, New York, and then Denver. Denver and Phoenix.
Oh, sorry, Denver. What?
I've never been to Seattle.
Do you like strip malls? Is that like your idea of fun? Is strip malls
That is true. It's a little bit too strip mall.
gun restaurants? Lauren Boebert.
For me, I would say Worcester, Lowell, Pawtucket, Holyoke, and Stoughton. I would say.
You should go run for office, dude.
Not necessarily in that order.
God, I mean,
that's a political statement. Are you running for office? Like, come on.
Pawtucket's in Rhode Island.
I like it's a suburb.
No,
I like Minneapolis too.
What?
Yeah,
It's a great city.
Maybe
top 5. I don't know.
All right, folks, we're going to head into the fun half. You can IM us at majorityapp.com, or you can IM us through the app, which you can get for free at majorityapp.com. Probably won't take phone calls today. Got a lot of things to talk about and go through. See you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back. just want to degrade the white man. Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflakes has what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder, what a fucking nightmare.
Bring back DJ Danner.
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense. You see white people doing drugs that look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males
psych. Fuck them.
Snowflakes has what? Snowflakes has what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
and the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African, and the alpha males are black. And the Africans are back.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are black. Africans are back.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma is...
Really?
What's that?
I've never heard you say that. Like, we're back. Sam Seder here on the Majority Report.
You never heard me say that?
I don't think so. It's not like you're on radio. People know they're watching.
It's like you're floating in the sky right now, doesn't she?
Me?
Yeah. I feel like it's like
Hey, look.
I don't know what it is. Like, I'm looking at that. Like, do you remember with the creator cat? What was it? What the guy? Like
a creationist cat?
Creationist cat?
Yeah, she does look.
I feel like there's like graphics where like the cat floats around, and you sort of look like that a little bit.
Down. It's very Aquarius of me. And
I don't know what that means. I don't.
I know you don't. That's why I said it.
No idea what that means.
I like making you feel uncomfortable, Sam.
Oh, that's not. I mean, it's very easy to do. This is so annoying. I don't know if I want to do this, but it's so annoying. Let's play this clip of Jen Psaki. If you wanted to show how the Democrats never, ever, ever seem to approach politics without it being completely backing up and sort of trying to make apologies for themselves. Here is Jen Psaki responding to a criticism from Republicans of her saying in an interview that there's no evidence that Democrats are soft on crime. Like, I mean, this is like a double, just play this.
This is what I was talking about in the interview for the full context. In the American Rescue Plan, there was additional funding to support local cops programs, something that every single Republican voted against. I said in that interview that I know they don't like it when we call that out. I'm going to keep calling that out because that's a fact. Also, President Biden has proposed a significant increase in funding for local cops programs in his budget, more than the prior president. That's a fact. So if those facts are uncomfortable, I'm sorry for people who feel they need to be critical, but the president has been a longtime advocate of addressing crime. He's never been for defunding the police. Our Department of Justice has increased funding, has put in place support for strike forces. And the other fact that is never talked about in these Fox packages, maybe in this one, is the fact that gun crime is a major driver of crime across the country. Also a fact. So those are pieces I think in that moment I was speaking to. And again, we're about the facts here, and addressing crime is something that is a root of the president's agenda.
I mean, there are a multitude of ways of taking the offensive on that, other than just trying to prove that we're not weak on crime.
It's almost like they're swift boating Biden with this.
And they're constantly backheeled on this, it feels. And there, there's an opportunity to go in. You want to lead with gun control. You want, more gun control. But the fact of the matter is that crime levels across this country are still significantly lower than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. That this is a fake issue. And
but it's also an issue that spreads the more they cover it, meaning it inspires
others. We are dedicating we need to fund things like homes, housing. We need to deal with issues like poverty. We need to deal with issues like the opioid overdose crisis. We need to fund these things. And the idea that people think the answer is to throw more money, good money after bad, in police departments is absurd. There is a way to get on the offense on these things. She could say, never mind the fact that we are not cutting the police departments. What is more important is we're not paying for other resources that we need to deal with the real problems that are being faced by people in the cities, in the towns, wherever it is. And I guess the sort of impetus of Democrats to respond in the defensive to these things, it never works.
But it's not even defensive. I mean, she could still be conditioned to respond to the defensive and stipulate facts. The fact is, I mean, I wouldn't even give them room to carry this argument at all. I would literally pivot, go right to mental health, go right to the guns, which you mentioned briefly. I wouldn't even acknowledge what they're trying to set. But even if she was on the defensive, there's a better way. She could have easily said, really? We have never spent more money in the history of America on the police force. Never spent more money. And this is a police force that is doxed the former mayor of New York. This is a police force that's currently, their union leader in New York in particular is being investigated by the FBI. This is a police force that is constantly, doing absolutely nothing to make sure that their officers are most prepared, not even giving them mental health training, which is, the majority of visits that they're visiting. We could be doing so much to make sure that this country is safer. So if you are serious about safety, Republican Party, if you are serious about this, then let's talk about what to put on the table. Because right now, all you're doing is advocating for more guns and then more money to a police force that's bloated. You hate big government? Well, here's the moment. Let's start spreading that money all over.
And it's the same. It's the turning it back on the Republicans is exactly what they should be doing. And it is the same sort of like, I think, impetus to, bring the Republicans in and create the bipartisan infrastructure bill. We played a clip the other day from Fox News where they were maligned. Like they had no idea that the bipartisan bill existed. Never mind that it was, and they were still able to use this as a cudgel against the Biden administration, even though the Biden administration had done exactly what they wanted. I mean, this is the point, is that they cannot win this fight by trying to appear as if they are placating that bipartisan itch or these other sort of so-called bipartisan issues.
But this is the thing that I really didn't understand about her. And frankly, all of her press conferences, I'm baffled. This is the guru of communications. And I get that she's trying, but I feel like the psychology aspect of communications was like she didn't take that class or whatever it was. Because she's not actually, she's not being bipartisan there. She's attacking Fox News. She's kind of mocking them for being like, oh, and it's like your gun issue. She needs to pick a lane. Are you going down the bipartisan lane, which we know is not the smart lane, but it doesn't matter. Are you in that lane, or are you in the anti, let's take the offensive lane? Which lane are you in? You're not being a clear communicator. You're ridiculing the press that you also want to warm up to. What are you doing? What's your message? What's your plan? What's your strategy? And stick to it.
That's a good point.
Hi.
Hi.
I was listening to a lot of that. Just didn't want to jump in.
All right, let's go over this. Let's do this Joe Rogan thing again, because yesterday we played the Instagram clip, and and I'm seeing some people who say that I will criticize Joe Rogan when there's criticism of I don't know, name I mean in the news who or the New York Times that led us into a war, or the fact that you have a bunch of neocons on MSNBC or this and that. You can do both.
Yeah.
But they're not mutually exclusive. And let's be clear, Joe Rogan has 11 million viewers. I don't know if all the cable news viewership combined has 11 million viewers.
Also, can we just say he also has a $100 million contract with a major corporation?
This is the other thing, and this is the thing. It is not censorship to say that Spotify making millions of dollars on their talent that they have paid $100 million to essentially produce his show. This is not some independent YouTuber at this point.
And if he was an independent YouTuber, he'd still be making bank right now if Spotify were to let him go tomorrow, which they're not going to do.
But this is a really important point. Bill Kristol, as much as we despise Bill Kristol and some of these New York Times columnists, they still have editors. They still have to go through, and granted, they make a lot of mistakes, right? That's with editors, that's with sending us, believing false information, Judy Miller. We understand the history of journalism. And that doesn't mean that you don't have editorial and fact checkers. This is a publicly traded corporation. There are stockholders. I mean, seriously, there are people who they have a duty to not just the public, but the shareholders who are part of their corporation. And it's not that they're censoring him or we're calling for censorship. They are boosting misinformation. They are investing in misinformation.
They're protecting their asset.
Yes. But let's also be clear. There was 35 episodes of Joe Rogan's show that when Spotify bought him, essentially, that they said we're not gonna take, that we're gonna bury. Where was the censorship outcry there? No, because he was getting $100 million. He doesn't give a shit. All right, but here is yesterday we talked about that Instagram message that he put out that I felt was incredibly disingenuous. Last night I was on Chris Hayes' program. This is what I said, but the funny part is, and I think I mentioned it in this first half, right before I went on, I saw a tweet by him, and we'll get to it in a second. But here, play this.
The host who tells tens of millions of viewers every week they don't need to be vaccinated during a pandemic. Michelle Goldberg is an op-ed columnist at the New York Times. Sam Seder is the host of the podcast Majority Report with Sam Seder, and they both join me now. And Sam, as a plucky, independent man I come to for entertaining conversation, but can't trust a word you say. What do you think about this situation?
Well, I should say, full disclosure, I tried to get on Rogan's show years and years ago because to go on his show was to really help out your own show. At the time, too, I felt like he had a lot of right-wingers, a lot of libertarians on. And subsequent to that,
he sort of announced on his show that he felt I was too harsh with right-wingers, so it didn't happen, but that was all well and good. But the point is, he's got a very, very important show. He's got a huge audience. And I think the thing that he doesn't fundamentally understand is that his intent is irrelevant.
Yeah.
It really is. And I actually think that, his intent isn't as bad as a lot of others, players out there, but his intent is irrelevant. He is spreading misinformation. Even in that Instagram video he did, the first 3 minutes are him trying to prove that misinformation doesn't even exist because there's been a changing dynamic with vaccinations and COVID over the course of 8 months, which of course, 8 months ago, vaccines did a different thing because COVID was a different thing. But he doesn't quite get what he's doing, I think, on many ways. I mean, he thinks he knows what he's doing, but he doesn't understand it from the perspective of the way that it impacts society.
Yeah, there's a kind of fascinating dynamic here. I mean, first of all, I should say that I sort of bristle a little bit at this kind of like call the manager liberalism. You see sometimes like, oh, that's misinformation. You need to like cut that person off. And so I'm generally still have a kind of sort of old school speech, more speech is better view.
All right, let's
one of the things that's a little weird here about.
Okay, let's pause it here. Right before I went on, I look at Twitter. This must have been, 8:30. And I took a snapshot of it. I think I meant to just send it to myself, which is what I do. But I took a snapshot of it, which was good.
Screenshot.
Screenshot, right, exactly. And Grandpa took a screenshot of it because he didn't know how to work his phone.
It is better than what you usually do, which is take a photo of your computer screen.
Right. And there, I do not do that. And so, so let's put it up. This is the tweet that he tweeted out 14 hours after this. Go ahead, put it up.
Was it pledged? More careful.
Okay. So, well, looky here. He says, Justin, he retweets a disclosed TV. Justin, Japan's Kawa in partnership with Kasato University at Tokyo Medical University says ivermectin is effective against Omicron in the phase 2 trial. Now, what he didn't do, now this is a 15-hour-old tweet. Mm-hmm. He retweets it, I think at around 7 p.m., so like 15 hours after it's been up, he's retweeted it. What he didn't do was even look at the next tweet in that line. Put up the thread, which says corrected. It didn't say that it was successful against Omicron. It was it had an antiviral effect. And we should also say, like, there was no study, there was no trial. It was like a marketing firm that did this. It was all BS. Now, it's possible that they're going to do a study. It's possible that there might be ivory, but that wasn't there. Okay, go back to the original tweet, Bradley. Go back to the one that we just showed just prior to that, because I want you to see how many likes were there.
Rogan's tweet.
Rogan's tweet.
Yeah. He's getting it. Hassan responded to him like,
yeah, okay.
Please read
91,000 likes.
And our daddy is right.
91,000 likes.
No, he's just a jag-off comedian. He's just there to talk about DMT, man. Why would you ever go to this guy for medical advice? Except 91.3 thousand people seem to.
So Hassan says, please read the article, man. Like, we'll look at the correction. So what do you do once you find out that you sent out to at least 100,000 people?
Take responsibility.
Or false information. This is what a person who does not have some type of ego invested in being right, okay?
Willing to admit they're wrong.
Who's willing to admit they're wrong.
Ideas. I'll have anybody on, and they can just say, "I'm a sponge, dude. I have no investment in any narrative."
Who understands that they have, despite the fact that they just want to go out there and just do my little podcast and talk to people, that when you get paid $100 million for an 11 million person audience, you have some responsibility to society. What do? You put up a correction. Show the correction. No, it was just, he just deleted the tweet. So the 100,000 plus people who probably saw the tweet, I mean, let's put it this way. There was at least 92,000 people who liked it. He doesn't need bots. The guy's got 11 million.
I completely agree with you. He doesn't need bots, but there are bots on top of it. Like you can just see it.
Who cares?
Because it helps boost it boosts the narrative. It does. It's part of a universe.
Maybe, but it's irrelevant. It largely is
Trump had bots.
The fact of the matter is, yes, okay, but the fact of the matter is, you had 100,000 people at least see that, and they're just going to go on. Why would they read it any more than he did? He obviously didn't even go down to the next tweet.
Well, what if a distinguished Canadian professor saw that and maybe said, "Oh, I don't know, Joe," or what did? Can you have that, Bradley?
Yeah.
Here's Jordan Peterson said,
So he quote tweeted Joe Rogan.
Yes, it's very interesting. And you know what? If we put or looky, or listen to that, we don't have to take any responsibility for any of this garbage anyways. It's just like, I was just, I don't know. I mean, that's the point. Here, finish the clip from Hayes.
There's something malevolent there when it's really just how it works.
And there's also this responsibility thing too, like just to peel the curtain back here, Sam. Like we do a podcast called Why Is This Happening? Comes out every Tuesday, and it gets like fact checked and it goes through standards. Yep. And when we first started doing that, I was like, oh my God, we're fact checking a podcast. It's like, well, yeah, we're fact checking a podcast because the podcast is the product that we put out in the world. And the things we say in it should be true. And there's some level, like, you want to be like, oh, we're just having a conversation. It's like, well, if you say things that aren't true, like, you put that out into the world. That's the way this works.
Yeah, and I say this as, someone who most of my best friends are comedians. And so there is this sense that because I'm not a journalist, that I don't have the same responsibility. And, this can be deployed in more or less malevolent ways. This is what Limbaugh used to say. I'm just an entertainer. You can't take me seriously. Right. And the bottom line is, if you're talking to 11 million people every time you do a podcast, you have a responsibility. And if you're the company that's paying for it, it's on you. And he gets a Spotify paycheck. And so it's on them. It's part of their brand now that they are the ones who are publishing this stuff. They are profiting off it, and it is hurting people. And it's their responsibility, and it's their brand.
And the other thing about it, too, is like you can just talk about stuff that doesn't matter that much. You know what I mean? Like, that's the other thing. You could just choose to like talk about comedy or talk about like.
He's in over his head on some level.
The thing.
And that's the bottom line. He's in over his head. He doesn't realize it. He's making too much money for them to tell him. And that's the bottom line. I mean, today he tweeted out, sort of gloriously, this AP story about ivermectin in a study from Japan. Well, 20 minutes later, the AP corrected its headline, and you never heard from him again about it. And so, this is a problem, and he doesn't want to take responsibility for it, and Spotify doesn't want to take responsibility for it, but someone's to blame.
I mean,
Seems like Zach nailed it.
Okay, I gotta agree with the guy with the beard.
I think at the root of this, and you guys touched on it, it's not just that he doesn't want to take responsibility. Just as people didn't want to wear masks, the same people who didn't want to wear masks, who think that the government is forcing them to take this, to take the vaccine, who think they're being censored for speaking out, at the root of this is privilege and not willing, white privilege, just to be very explicit here, white privilege, white male privilege in this situation in which they don't want to be told what to do. And it's an entitlement. Everybody else has to be part of the community. Everybody else needs to try to follow the laws. But the same people don't want to pay taxes. The same people who, including Joe Rogan, didn't he move to Austin because he doesn't want to pay taxes? There is an entitlement and an unwillingness to be told what to do. It's rooted in privilege.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the case. But I mean, I don't care what he does when he's sitting around, talking to his friends. It's like, but the bottom line is that he can. There's no censoring here. It's just a question of like, if you're going to be making all of that money, and if the company's going to be making all of that money off of you, you got to be held to account for putting out this type of garbage. And Hayes was right. Like, He doesn't have to. He doesn't have to. Wade into COVID if he doesn't want to.
Yeah. Well, if he wants to deflect criticism away from himself, if he wants it to roll off his back like water on a duck, then talk about DMT again and talk about MMA. That's what I said yesterday on the show. Like, he does not have to be a peddling COVID misinformation. But what has caused some of this explosive growth in his show?
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's be real here. This is not somebody who's just passively receiving guests from his producers. This is somebody making an active choice because not just because this interests him, but because this makes him money. And there is an audience that feels like, I am accessing this special information. I don't want to go along with what the dominant narratives about COVID are. It's kind of boring to me. It doesn't feed into my narcissism. Right. And that's what Rogan does. He makes you feel, young white male who's probably watching this, you're a special little snowflake. You have this secret knowledge about COVID, and you have a way that you're going to be able to beat it that the rest of society doesn't. Don't be a
And you don't have to read the newspaper to get there.
And listen to me, actually.
You're not a sheeple.
Listen to me, actually. Right. This is Rogan. I'm not a news guy, but listen to me so you feel like you're a special person in this world. And like, honestly, there's a sadness to it because there's so much insecurity and atomization out there, but that's honestly what makes it grosser with him.
Yeah. So and the other part is like, listen, you don't have to do the work. I've brought in the doctors. We've done the research for you. You don't have to open up a book. I know you're busy doing all the things that you do. Just listen to my podcast. We brought on a doctor to prove my theory, and we did the work for you. So you don't have to do it.
Yeah.
The free speech context of this is what really frustrates me, because the subtext of this Joe Rogan stuff and all the people that rushed his defense is that the woke libs are coming and they won't let us get the information out. Meanwhile, this is in the context of an actual countrywide policy assault toward ideological conformity in the name of fighting wokeness and the anti-CRT thing. They contribute to that. All those people contribute to that, and they're silent about it.
That's really the point. The idea that you cannot hold Joe Rogan to standards because of other outlets don't properly hold their people to standards. It's just BS.
Well, they'll come to you, right? You were on MSNBC. I would like saying this, and I'm sure that's like going to be used to impugn whatever you had to say there, as if Rogan's Spotify contract. I mean, it's probably similar, like what you were paid to go on Chris Hayes' show last night, right?
I don't want to brag. But there were some zeros behind. I mean, if I invoice at the end of the year, if that ends up, I'm not even clear on that. But yeah, there was some zeros involved in that. But the idea is, I mean, I think that's a very small group of people. The bottom line is that it's just incredibly irresponsible. And this guy is, I mean, I think of all of them, it really is more. It really is more of a story of somebody who wants to feel like, I mean, the amazing thing is in that Instagram video he put out, he's sort of bragging, he doesn't do any research.
Yeah.
But he tries to have these guests on. Well, dude, how do you know what guests, like, you're picking these guests based upon what?
Why is it the flex that you have no agency?
Because it's sort of a thing that these bros do. They
it's not true though.
This is a specific, I think, in this instance, and this is why I think Rogan is different from those other right-wing shows, is that he perceives himself, he is more aligned with sort of like a certain group of comedians and performers who feel like there is some type of license that they have because just simply by being a comedian. Never mind, like, he's not doing a comedy show. There was no, he's not any more than, and he may be funnier than me, but we're not doing a comedy show. He's not doing a comedy show. He's doing a conversation where maybe there's times where his attitude is funny or he says a funny thing or he swears in a funny way. But this is not comedy when you're interviewing an epidemiologist. Even if you make something, even as a joke, you do not get some license because you're a comedian to go out and not and provide this information and have no responsibility for it because, well, it's under the rubric of me being an artist. I'm sorry. That's just bullshit.
Yeah,
this is bullshit.
He wants it both ways, and he doesn't even believe it.
What I don't get is, okay, so I'm curious to see how many people have actually dropped off of his show since he's been going harder on this, because he did take an active decision on this early, before I even believe, and I mean, it's hard to kind of, but I remember I listened to that stupid Elon Musk interview because everyone said you have to listen to it. People on the left were like, you have to listen to it. This is like 2 years ago. And that was, I think, the first time I heard him question the validity of COVID-19 with Elon Musk. Now, granted, he had the audience because of Elon Musk and he had a large audience at that point, but he made a conscious decision at that point, before the anti-vax crowd, before we even had a vaccine. He tapped into that when it was probably only, I'm just spitballing here, like 15, maybe % of his audience. That's pretty big, but like maybe it was 7%. So how much of his audience has been lost since he's made this move, which might,
None.
He doesn't need to build the audience off the anti-vax folks. I don't believe that. I think other people need to build their audience off the anti-vax line of train of thought, the Jimmy Dores and the other, dumb left. I don't think Joe Rogan needs to do that. If he just stuck to what he's been doing all along, he would probably have kept more of his audience, because it's still a significant group of people, but it's a small group of people. Meaning
his audience is bigger.
I understand his audience is bigger, but are they sticking around because of this very conscious decision for him to take a risk on a minority issue?
I don't think that anybody's sticking around because of a particular issue. I think it's about him branding himself as some type of maverick thinker. And so it really doesn't matter what the content is to maintain that brand. It just so happens that as a byproduct, it is his contrarianism, like he's a free thinker, nobody tells him what to do and this and that. I think that's what builds into it.
I fear the inverse, sorry. I fear the inverse, Nomi. I feel that there are people who felt like he speaks to me on this maverick level, and this is a kind of a voice that I can connect with, or this is like an alternative perspective, and it's radicalized people on COVID.
Without a doubt, it's radicalized, which kind of goes to my premise. But I don't think this is a huge risk for him, right? He is an idiot, but he's not an idiot that he's not seeing the press around him. It is a risk for him at Spotify. It is a risk for him 2 years ago to be saying that, maybe COVID's not real with Elon Musk. He took a path very early on, and it was a minority path. And so I really do think that he's probably, I'm not saying why people stick around, he's probably lost some of his more normie audience. And I don't know if he's gained enough of I disagree with you. I mean, look at the number of people in this country who are anti-vax.
Basic numbers. There's
a finite number.
But I'm
is it because of the vax, or is it because of not?
I mean,
of when?
Yeah. I mean, if you look at his numbers 3 or 4 years ago, before he had a Spotify contract versus now.
Different. I'm saying since he's been anti-vax, since he made that decision, and especially since and so like in the last month, now that people is starting to really pick up steam. I mean, we were complaining about this 2 years ago, a year ago, whatever. When he first started, I would love to see like if there was any sort of information on how much audience he's lost as a result of his anti-vax policies, and how much he's getting, because there's a finite number of anti-vaxxers.
Yes, but I don't think that people are reacting, his audience is reacting in the way that you think it is.
Yeah, I mean, that's always how it works until it's too much, until they realize, the gig is up.
I mean, if somebody has evidence of that, but the numbers are the numbers. His numbers are going like this. They're not going like this.
I'm curious what happens after this. This is a campaign. This is like an actual active campaign now. It's like, okay, yeah, they'll go up until there's a campaign against it.
I mean, possibly. I think he's got to have a ceiling, but I mean, 11 million people, that's a huge audience.
I think in regards to like whether he believes it or not, he's genuinely persuaded by Brett Weinstein and those.
Oh, without a doubt.
Like, absolutely. And that's because he's been, and I put the picture in the chat, but he's been in this IDW. The IDW folks, they basically constrain his ideology, really. Like he's not able to think outside of these sorts of guys. So like,
how do you think Ben Shapiro feels about being touched there by Dave Rubin?
Well, it's notable, like Sam Harris and Ben Shapiro, to their credit, and Eric Weinstein because he trusts Israel, have been like pro-vax. But like this is the crowd that Rogan has basically gone in with, and their fans. Like it's been difficult stands for folks like Sam Harris to come out against this anti-vax stuff. Joe Rogan doesn't have that kind of courage, frankly.
But at the end of the day, Rogan is secondary in this. It really is Spotify at this point. If you're going to give them the platform, you're going to publish it. This is not just even. This is even different than YouTube and Facebook, because this is a clear case of a production company. Spotify is a studio in this instance. They are paying him for exclusivity. They are paying him to be on the platform. They are using him to promote their other shows and leveraging it. So all of it, it's all of it. It's a real problem. And it's Spotify's problem at the end of the day.
And I hope I'll just say, like, I do not consider it censorship that I consider a project of my efforts on this show and Left Reckoning to make people understand that should be a bad investment, and I hope it becomes a liability for Spotify.
Yeah.
Right, of course.
Well, their stock prices dipped, which is why he did that Instagram video.
I have an update, guys.
Everyone
Somebody sent this to us. Jay on Twitter sent me a chart. Google searches for his show have gone down drastically since December 1st, 2020. In mid-2020, they were much higher at its peak. But then since December, it's gone significally lower. I don't know if
that's because he's behind a paywall
on
now.
Spotify.
Yeah, but Spotify was before that.
When did he go into Spotify? I think this year.
It was a recent
in 2021.
deal, yeah.
But searching somebody, I understand what you're saying, but like, it's still somehow reflective.
No, it happens
like going down in a search.
With CERN too. Once you go behind a paywall,
yeah,
you don't become as big of a part of the culture. Broadly speaking, that search stuff that happened.
Yeah, but the deal happened in May, but his exclusivity started September 1st
of 2020.
Of 2020.
Oh, thank you so much. He's real time update. I'll send you guys the tweet. But we found that prior to going exclusive from December 2019 to 2020, Rogan's guests could expect a gain of around 4,000 Twitter followers. After we went exclusive, the number declined by half to around 2,000. But the numbers actually don't seem to.
That's what I'm saying.
No, I know, but I'm looking at the actual chart.
I mean, there was a exclusivity was September 1st, 2021.
Sorry, I said September 2020. My bad.
I mean, that's bound to happen. And part of, and I think there is an argument that part of his COVID stuff was a way of trying to remain relevant. I mean, this happened to Howard Stern too. When he went to Sirius satellite, I mean, I can tell you, having been in the radio business at that time, and also, followed Howard Stern's career and just radio in general, and Limbaugh, Howard Stern was in the news once a week in the early aughts and in the 90s. I mean, he was in the news once a week. There was a story, not too dissimilar about Rogan.
Except
but
this
it was
more just like salacious.
Yes, it was more like salacious. He did something that was like rude or something like this or whatever, sexist or whatever it was. And as soon as he goes behind a paywall, your cultural valence drops dramatically because people just can't incidentally see you.
Yeah.
With Rogan, it wasn't. In fact, there was. I subscribe to some podcast trade newsletters, and this search stuff was out there. Somebody had actually done a report on this, and maybe that's what it is that you have. Mm-hmm. That once he went behind the paywall, the search terms dried up, and the COVID stuff sort of like put him back into the news with a little bit of controversy. So this cuts both ways.
And Spotify's more accessible than even Sirius.
Yes. Much more.
Well, actually, no, that's not true. Sirius is in almost every single car. It's a weird, I used to work at Sirius. It's a very weird, we don't know the numbers per se, but like, it is like, you basically get it when you buy a car.
Yeah, right. You got to pay for the service.
I don't have a car.
No, you get it free for like 2 years in a car.
But Spotify, I mean, I think like
you can have
go
ads if you
satellite.
don't subscribe to Spotify and you can listen.
Yeah, I mean, it is the platform is a lot more accessible, I think, at this point than satellite, and so that's what happens. And you know, maybe he does some of this controversy, invites some of this controversy as a way of maintaining in the news. But again, people hold Spotify to it. It becomes becomes more of a liability.
I think that public pressure is just really starting to reach that critical point. This is like in campaigns, political campaigns, same thing. You know, it's a slow and steady, and then it reaches a point where a certain base does not want to be affiliated with it because it's too far. So I'm curious to see, with public pressure, with kind of exposing just how bad it is, if a chunk of his audience that is not anti-vax and doesn't even want to be like lumped in with it starts to, I mean, people are canceling their subscriptions, but I want to see how that's reflected.
Yeah, I suspect that it's that to the extent that they feel pressure, it's going to be more on not necessarily in terms of numbers, but in terms of like the brand, the damaging of the brand from a long-term play. Spotify does not want to get associated with this, but you know, the money they're making off of him is just extraordinary.
Roger Ailes was, at the end of the day, taken down. Bill O'Reilly was taken down. There's a point where it's just not good branding for a company. Simultaneously, I just want to see how his numbers go down. Not that that's going to affect, make that clear, that's not going to affect the business decision. I'm just curious if it drops, because I do think that anti-vaxxers are finite. The rest of the audience isn't.
I think so, but I don't know that they perceive him that way. And maybe they will at one point.
I'm not saying it's about them. I'm just curious from his brand perspective. That's not going to move Spotify. It's the other stuff.
Wrangler, a lightning to hear David Dayen talk about the supply chain, whether it's ships or trains. David Dayen knows what he's saying because he has a big brain. How come MSNBC Sam has less pauses and ums than MR Sam? Because that's where I get the big money.
You put on your TV voice.
Yeah, exactly. Chantel, Sam, Emma, what stakes do you have when Democrats fail miserably in their policy making? Your show will continue to do well. You will have money to sustain. Many of your listeners, like me, have a lot at stake. Don't you think that defines the way people demand for an alternative to Dems and get disheartened, unlike you, who has absolutely nothing at stake, actually? Well,
I mean, we live in this country, and also I would say that it's not like we're getting paid the big bucks to do this. We're in this because we care, I think, more than the average person.
I don't understand. If you think that that's the only issue, then there's very little that I could actually discuss.
Yeah.
I think it's doing you a bigger disservice to treat like the People's Party or the Green Party without skepticism. I think it's leading people up a worse dead end than saying this is actually a long process that is going to take, exerting force on a whole bunch of different ends. And like, I don't really get that we're not disenchanted with the Democratic Party, just saying that nothing else has come to say like, oh, there's the new vehicle, definitely. Like, and I don't know, it's just childish besides that.
I would also say that if you are relying on only the uninsured people in this country to bring about Medicare for all, you will be SOL. Bottom line. That will not happen.
Or anything without allies. I mean, it's not even, it's any movement. You need allies, you need people who've been affected in the past but are in better situations. It's just not a very,
shocked as to the assertion that we do not feel the ramifications of policy in the United States as people that live in the United States.
You live in New York. It's like impossible to survive here. I don't know. And also on top of it all, it's not like your business model is set on Democrats sucking, because like newsflash, numbers are down across the board for anybody without Trump in office.
Right. Then we would not be this. In fact, fact giving a nuanced perspective on the Democrats' failures is actually less lucrative in this online space.
And yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. I know plenty of people who also, frankly, do this for a living that don't have health insurance. And they have same positions that I do.
Just because you see us
on, they don't think your fever dream is any more, useful.
Just because you see us on the internet does not mean like we're sitting on a pot of gold here.
But even that's largely irrelevant. I mean, I was against the Iraq War, and I can tell you that it did not impact my life one iota. And sadly, I think for the overwhelming number of Americans, it did not impact their life one iota. Not one iota. Unless you had a family member in the military, or unless you had relatives in Iraq, that was the whole story of that entire war. It doesn't impact my life one way or another, whether we abandon Afghanistan as we've done. It doesn't impact my life largely as to whether we show no humanity to immigrants. I mean, I could go on and on and on.
At least immediately.
If you are looking for, you think that the only people who can advocate or analyze or criticize Democrats in their failures are people who are directly impacted by them, then I think you're going to find that there's just not going to be enough people associated to make any change.
And historically, that's not the case, right? For every Cesar Chavez, there's an FDR, and I understand it's complicated. There's a Karl Marx who's being subsidized by his best friend's, father's factory. I mean, there are many people and points in history where people in privilege or on, the beginning of having some form of privilege have fought for, everybody below them and on the ground. That's just how movements work. You have allies showing up, the March on Washington that were not Black Americans, but were union members. It's just not realistic.
This person needs content for their message that is just moral blackmail, because they can't say that the Green Party or the People's Party, the things that I've supported, are actually going to accomplish stuff either. So you just revert to this sort of.
Well, I would also love to see the same questioning of those parties as they throw at the Democratic Party. I always ask who's funding the Democratic Party. I'm also curious who's funding the Green Party and who's funding the People's Party, because they're not very transparent about that either. There's no membership. At least the DNC has elections. They're broken, but at least they have elections. So show me. I'd love to know how your party is better. We're not seeing it.
The real alternative to this, in my sense, is like independent socialists like Robin Warloba in Minneapolis. And guess what? Those people don't run their campaigns mainly just shitting on Democrats. They run in primaries, but they say, like, we don't care about the Democratic endorsement. We just want this position of power. But they understand that voters, especially the ones that they're going to try to turn out on election day, aren't going to want that just let's flame Democrats for 90% of the time as part of your campaign. That's just not, it's not realistic. Way to get
and the truth is, Bernie's movement, you just captured it, Matt. This is the hard truth about Bernie's movement. He had so many the majority of his movement, people who voted for him, were Democrats. You think that unions are going to leave the Democratic Party anytime soon? Well, guess what? You just cut out a big chunk of this progressive movement. It's unions are flawed. They need to be strengthened, but I'm going to guess they're not going to sign up for the Green Party anytime soon, because they have to negotiate with Democratic legislatures and Democratic governors on getting funding. And I mean, that's what happens in New York. So there's a reality to how these movements and these parties are built. And Bernie Sanders, as much as he was an independent, he caucused with Democrats and he worked with the Democratic Party to run for the Democratic presidential nomination.
Quinn from Minneapolis, happy Tuesdayin'. Dimash, lathe update, cleaned it up, probably junk, still a great show. Gravy, we love David, don't we, folks? Majority Report wardrobe coordinator. Come on, Sam, you know I'm colorblind. All the blue shirts look great to me. Thanks for covering, Emma. Canasparian, big fan, Sam. Emma, have you seen the recent videos from TYT?
No. I go home and don't consume the content that I consume here on a daily basis, like the news. I've tried to disengage. Stop asking about that.
Wayne Kerr. They went against black woman nomination in the Supreme Court, saying it can be identity politics. Anna promoted a libertarian against housing for all policies and even appreciated Joe Rogan for his take apology. It's disheartening. Wayne Kerr. Whoops, did not mean to send 100 times. If Jen Psaki's only goal was to alienate the left, half the party, I don't know what she would do differently. Joe Rogan says what he thinks, even if he's a stupid meathead. Fauci and the CDC screwed up by releasing all their information in a way that thought people would react the way they wanted it to. His appeal is authenticity. Yeah, I mean, and I see, this is the thing, is that I think that is what his appeal is. The problem is authenticity and misinformation in the midst of a pandemic is going to get a lot of people killed. It doesn't matter what his intent is. Yeah. You can say that Fauci and the CDC screwed up, which I think at certain times is absolutely correct. I mean, and in retrospect, you can maybe make different decisions. We don't know really what was going on when the Fauci's boss, the president of the United States, was trying to pretend that we didn't actually have a pandemic that was going on. I don't know if people remember him going to the CDC, touring around and going like, why are we doing testing? Or why are we letting people off a boat? Because then we're just going to have more. We're going to have more here. Like, I'm not making excuses for Fauci and the CDC, but the thing that people don't understand, and I think like largely in all of this conversation about, is that this is about public health is different than medicine and science. It is beyond that. It is how do you get a society, particularly one that is as fractured as ours, to do what they need to do, broadly speaking, to minimize and mitigate the impact of a pandemic that has the ability to kill, at least so far, almost 900,000 people in this country. And so, like, you know, look, we've talked about this in the past. Like, it's the same with just vaccination regime that existed prior to COVID. Put COVID aside for a moment. We vaccinate in this country and assess risk that if you were to go down to the individual, the risk would not be the same. My risk as a, you know, as a white guy living on the Upper West Side, let's say, is different than somebody whose risks who lives in the Bronx in terms of just on a daily basis. My risk as someone who is surrounded by people with health care is different than someone else's risk who is surrounded by people who maybe only 60% have health care. And that implicates whether my child, who is newly born, has the potential of being exposed to hepatitis, let's say. That's just a fact. But we live within a mile or two of each other. And so when you're assessing the need to get children who are newly born a vaccination of hepatitis, it's not down to the individual. My risk may be dramatically less. My child's risk may be dramatically less than someone's child who lives a mile away from me in terms of their ability to get hepatitis. And they could say, well, look, if you fall into this demographic, don't get, you don't need to get a hepatitis shot until 6 months out or 8 months out or a year out. But if you fall into this demographic, your chances are much higher. Your kid getting hepatitis, you need to get the shot. That's not going to work to get as many people vaccinated. And so they make an assessment. What is the danger associated with that vaccine that is going to protect kids from hepatitis? It's small. It's tiny. So we're going to have everybody get vaccinated hepatitis, you know, within whatever it is, I can't remember. But let's say it's 2 months or a week or whatever it is, so that we can protect those people who have the greatest exposure, even if we're being too cautious for the person who isn't as in danger of exposure, because that is what public health policy is. And it is the same dynamic that exists when you've got a once in 100 years pandemic in a much larger population, and you've got to go from 0 to 60. And that's what's so dangerous about people out there who are so excited at themselves of being contrarian thinkings. I don't care if it's Rogan or even like, you know, Nate Silver, who are like, well, you know, we're being overly cautious about masks. Well, you know what? When you've got to message something to 300 million people, you have a choice. Which side are we going to err on? Are we going to err on too many people wearing masks in too many situations? Or are we going to err on the side of like, well, no, people aren't going to wear masks? I mean, this is what's so sort of ridiculous.
There's no incrementalism in this. There's no incrementalism.
No, there's no, like, you can't be surgical about public health policy in the midst of a pandemic.
Well, but that's part of public health policy. Like Fauci's talked about it, and in the beginning, especially, he was fighting a messaging war because on one hand, he as a doctor and his entire CDC has been trained in how to message public health issues, knowing the extraordinary struggles and challenges that they're going to have to face, but simultaneously having a president who's at war with him.
Yes.
So mistakes are going to be made, but he couldn't even get mask mandates. I mean, as much as Dr. Fauci may have made a couple of mistakes here and there, he still had Ron DeSantis, in a completely live free Florida with no mask mandates to this day. And at the worst moments, and no vaccine mandates, airplane travel to this day does not have a vaccine mandate, which is outrageous. But that's not a Dr. Fauci issue. That is a administration issue.
Right. And at some level, it's also a capitalist issue.
Of course.
I mean, that's
most levels it's a capitalist.
Well, because they don't want to provide resources for people that would, there's really two ways you go about this, right? It's either you acknowledge the existence of this, you say that it's a difficult problem, and the way that we're going to essentially foam the runway, sorry to use the metaphor from the flying, the way that we're going to foam the runway is we're going to support people staying home. We're going to support businesses. Yeah. We're going to support unemployment benefits. We're going to extend it. They don't want to do any of that now. And so now it's like, it's incumbent upon all the pressure is to get people back to work, pretend like it's normal. We're losing 2,000 people a day.
I mean, it just brings it back to our conversation with David Dayen about how there's no allowance for slack in the system in neoliberal capitalism, and that creates dead bodies. And I mean, that's like how we've approached the pandemic, how the hospitals have been overworked and overwhelmed from the pandemic. That's all a result of that.
St. Paul, I don't think you should be so dismissive of the anti-Dem messages that are becoming more common. The point is, I don't know that they're coming more or less.
Think they're more common.
What is with the IMs today?
The point is that we don't have time for long-term thinking. Accelerationism may be almost certain to fail, but it's not unreasonable to conclude that working with centrist Dems is absolutely certain to fail. We have to face up to the risk that progressive cooperation with the Dem establishment will lead to nihilism for a critical mass of supporters. Well, first off, I don't see evidence of that.
Right.
I just don't see evidence of what you're talking about.
I think I see evidence of a project to hasten that along.
Right, which will lead you to just nihilism, period.
Which I think people should steel themselves against that.
Without a doubt.
You can't have acceleration. You can't be an acceleration. Have a movement of accelerating.
Accelerate what?
Yeah. What are we accelerating?
There's no movement.
Forcing the vote. You're out of your fucking mind if you think that's a serious way to address this stuff.
There's absolutely zero historical precedent for accelerationism. It's a made-up thing because you want to work backwards from your nihilism about the Democratic Party. Stop pretending there's any coherence to the political strategy. Enough. Bear at home too. Sam, are you seriously going to Disney during February break? Disney will be crazy busy then. Instead, you should look into a Disney cruise. They are run at about 25% capacity, and they require vaccines and a negative test to get on. Plus, they are all included. A cruise?
No. I'm sorry. That was just too much.
Dude, everyone who wrote it right in.
I mean, on some level, there is something to that. Like a 25% capacity.
Everyone's laughing.
I mean, honestly,
Disney's outside though, right? Isn't the majority of Disney outside?
Yeah, it's outside. I mean, it's going to be crowded. We couldn't get reservations for food, but that's fine. My kids don't care about that. They just, we're going to be mostly outside. But a cruise, because it's tiring to be, on call 24/7 with kids. And I've thought about a cruise in the past, but right now I'm not so.
Also environmentally not great. And if you're a real progressive, Sam, you would never take part in that.
I can't imagine Disney's terribly great either environmentally.
Well, a cruise is really bad. The John Oliver episode, if you haven't seen it, is very good on cruises.
Hayden from Texas. Sam, can I get a shofar from me and my twins, Matt's 23rd birthday? Love the show. MR crew, you're doing awesome work. Here you go. That's for you, and that's for Matt. I imagine when you're a twin, you end up having to like share your birthday parties, you get one cake and that type of stuff. So that's why I get 2 shofars.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, having your birthday on Christmas or something. I always feel bad for those kids.
Marxist, Leninist, imperialist, patriot. I told you, Sam, Amazon knew we were right. Force the boat. Ben Zined, Baltimore, please. I guess that's from the Where to Have a Show. Wow, it's really brave of you guys to choose Bakersfield for your California show. All beats. Infertile Turtle. Can't wait for the live show in Barris, Brants.
Ooh, Baton Rouge we could do.
Judy Ruliani, come to Balt Lake City. Sad man. Hey, Sam, the others in your 4-dimensional office. Still haven't figured out how Matt can be in 2 different places at once. If you wouldn't mind, could you draw a quick setup of your places so I can finally sleep at night? Thanks in advance. It won't keep me from still watching your show.
What do you mean in 2 places at once? Is it because when I look this way and Sam, you look... Matt is like sort of parallel to me, but like directly in Sam's eyesight.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Because our desk is curved.
Yep. Michael Tracy's delightful girlfriend. Let's go, Brandon, Manitoba. Reporting from downtown Ottawa, there are currently a lot of villages across Canada missing their idiots. A lot of reports of people harassing residents and employees. The truck protests are Mussolini's March on Rome, if it were organized by the people behind the Fry Festival.
What?
We haven't
organized by the Fire Festival people?
Fire Festival.
It's as if it were.
There is a, I mean, I don't know where the Freedom Convoy is in Canada, is to get rid of the Canadian fascism that's up there, apparently.
Yeah, I saw a clip of some of those guys in the indigenous style drum circle saying yabba dabba doo. So that was interesting to look at.
No.
What is that?
They're being racist.
Okay.
Yeah. Horrible.
Freedom from indigenous people, I guess. Oh, geez, did you hear about this? This is actually pretty funny. Get clip number 13 ready, because we've been talking about this for a long time around here. And behind me, behind Emma, you could see our sets.
Mm-hmm.
And I constructed these. I don't know how many years ago was that, Matt? Were you here when I did this?
Yeah, but it was like right when I started. So like maybe late 2015, early 2016.
Okay, so 6 years. And then all of a sudden, put up that picture, Bradley. I see what you got there. Put up this picture. Put up that picture, yeah. Look at that.
What?
Whoa, what's behind David? What's behind David Pakman? Yeah, those panels. And he's been skating by for a long time on this. No accountability whatsoever.
Probably thought we forgot about it. And so
what I did was I farmed out. I wasn't going to attack him directly. I farmed it out to
an unlikely ally, I would say, but
unlikely ally farm team. Sometimes what you do is you put this thing up on like there's sort of a Fiverr for podcast hosts.
Oh yeah,
and YouTubers, where you put up like who's gonna attack this guy for this.
So it's like a bounty system.
It's like a broker, like a market. It's like a marketplace. It's like a market. It's like an exchange.
Okay, so you went on like Silk Road and
for posting mercenaries.
Yeah. Right. Okay.
Yeah, I don't even remember what the name of the website is. I posted up there.
Podcasthitman.com.
Yeah, exactly. Who's gonna take on this guy Pakman for what he's done? Unlikely guy. But play the clip. Sound, please.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
No.
Oh no.
I think you should just reenact it, Sam.
All right, forget it. Against TAMZ. Sam, I had messaged yesterday. We'll try again till you read this. Can you please feature Christian Smalls? He's a hero. Yeah, we took him down. We're gonna check it out. Left-handed stranger. Please clip the interview so I can send it to people. Sam's hanging Chad. All this talk of a black woman Supreme Court justice had me thinking of how much we need a Native American justice as well as the Native Congress Senate members. Could something ever have been done, like representatives in Congress that are dedicated to Native Americans in their state or region, independent of other Congress members? For example, you have the usual 4 Wyoming Congress members and have 2 Wyoming Native Congress members elected or appointed by the Native people in that area. I mean, it seems to me that you could have done that. I don't know what point in our history that maybe during Reconstruction, you maybe.
I mean, I don't think we ever had the Enlightenment to actually do that, like give tribes senators, which we should have done, but like that would have gotten in the way of dispossessing them of their land.
Are there, I mean, also, I mean, it is sort of shocking that we don't have any like even non-voting members from reservations.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how
Canada could do something like that. Like they're usually
And I mean,
represent
interest groups too, like having interest groups for the indigenous communities in this country. I mean, it'd be really interesting to have like sort of, folks funding an effort to elect more. And I think you can still, if you're on a reservation, I think you can still run.
But still, I mean, it says pretty much everything that like you have non-voting members in Puerto Rico or in DC, but of course, no, not for representation for indigenous people in this country.
Good morning.
Puerto Rico is an asset for the right wing. That's why.
Yeah, well, right. They feel that they can exploit it. Reservations less so.
Let's do this video here. This was actually from last week, but just more, the more opportunity for the right wing to create this evil boogeyman in immigrants. And we should say that the Biden administration, as far as I can tell, has been atrocious, broadly speaking, in terms of immigrant issues. On some level, there is, I'm sure that the apparatus has been broken by the Trump administration, but a year into this, I think it's really just about a fear of addressing the issue. Nevertheless, here is Fox and Friends. This is a video that was taken from like in August, right, of last year? Yep. And it's actually teenagers who are being sent around the country to be with either family members or sponsors and from the border. But it is framed as if there is some like secret plan afoot by the Biden administration to infiltrate.
To replace us.
Sleeper
and
cells.
This, here is Kilmeade Ducey and Ainsley Earhart talking about this nefarious flight that took place in the evening.
Oh, there's audio.
Not working? No.
We're having a technical issue, guys. I'm sorry. It's all good. I mean, it's not your fault.
Bradley, is your Zoom, is your audio, is your mic muted?
No, but I'm sharing sound.
Did I think it plugged in?
Okay. Let's just do IMs and we'll get out of here. Sham Seder, go Paw Sox. Penny from New Mexico, naming your top 5 cities. You're all such elites. Joe from Kansas City, anyone know anything about Mark Cuban's new healthcare scam?
Oh, no.
Spocko, Sam, you were great on Hayes last night talking about Rogan's misinformation doesn't exist Instagram post. The segment on your show about Rogan was a masterclass in analyzing I'm just an entertainer shtick. I do wish Hayes and others in the media would stop viewing spreading medical misinformation as the same as speech you don't like. It's not. It can be deadly. Government does have a role in preventing that, not just the corporations that sponsor the speaker. Sadly, I couldn't focus on what you were saying because your camera was out of focus. Please fix it. Yeah, you know what? I don't know why I saw that in retrospect. I couldn't tell at the time.
On Hayes?
Yeah.
It's just Zoom.
No, it was Skype, and usually it's better than that.
Oh.
There was something out of focus with the camera. But
They don't send you one of those trucks? You know, the vans, no?
Are you being facetious?
No, I'm serious. That's what a lot of I've seen it, and Fox News are doing it. They're sending a little van, and they park right in front of wherever you live, and you go in the van, and it's like a whole studio set up in there.
Oh no, I had to jerry rig it too in my apartment.
That's so funny to think of people doing hits in the street outside their place.
So weird.
No.
It's fun though.
No, I was in my apartment with and like trying to jerry rig stuff. Lefty Sparky, you guys should go to Chicago for a live show. Sorry, does it start with a B?
I've never been to Chicago. It's not crazy. I've been all over. I've been all over the country, like you know, but I've never been to Chicago. I don't know why.
Oh.
I want to go really badly.
Dim Tool, this just in, the copium mines are overflowing today as Amnesty International announced that indeed Israel is an apartheid state. Love to see people calling a human rights organization anti-Semitic. Yeah, I mean, I think this is, there's certain inevitability of people reacting that way, but the fact of the matter is there have been many Jewish officials, Israeli officials, in addition, obviously, to Arab officials Arab Israeli officials who have said that Israel is either very close to becoming an apartheid state or is in fact an apartheid state. And it's just the reality. And I can understand why people are upset about it because there's some pretty bad connotations with it, but it is simply the facts. From Amnesty International, the comprehensive report, this is them writing about their own report, sets out how massive seizures of Palestinian land and property, unlawful killings, forcible transfer, drastic movement restrictions, and the denial of nationality and citizenship to Palestinians are all components of a system which amounts to apartheid under international law. I mean, what part of massive seizures of Palestinian land and property, unlawful killings, forcible transfer, drastic movement restrictions, denial of nationality and citizenship, what part of that is not factual?
Well, just because the Israeli government isn't putting up its hand and saying we are allowing these extrajudicial killings, but as opposed to just like passively and with a wink and a nod allowing for these settlements as well into Palestinian land.
But this is a specific, there is a specific checklist essentially for international law.
Yeah.
And if your response is, well, they have to do this because, that doesn't cut it. That's not the way it works. The system's maintained by violations which Amnesty International found to constitute apartheid as a crime against humanity as defined in the Rome Statute and Apartheid Convention. And just to be clear, a system of apartheid is an institutionalized regime of oppression and domination by one racial group over another. I mean, this checklist is set out. There is no, what, they do this because, or it's justified because. If you want to argue that an apartheid state is justifiable, that's your argument.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't change the reality of what is on the ground. If apartheid means anything, it means what's going on in Israel. And if you want to revert and attempt to argue it's justifiable because, then live with that.
Make that argument.
Amnesty International recognizes that Jews, like Palestinians, claim a right to self-determination. and does not challenge Israel's desire to be a home for Jews. Similarly, it does not consider that Israel labeling itself a Jewish state in and of itself indicates an intention to oppress and dominate. So this is not about anybody saying that Israel doesn't have the right to exist. Even in their own statement, doesn't have anything to do with Israel labeling itself a Jewish state. It has to do with specific actions that Israel has taken against Palestinians based solely on the fact that they're Palestinian. That's it. That's
led
what
by their political leadership.
That's what apartheid means. And there is no mitigation of that because you think that they have a reason to do it,
or because
security concerns,
or because of past trauma, right? I mean, this is the actions of Israel and the apartheid is, you can make a real compelling argument for a knee-jerk reaction to generational trauma, and there's like a whole history behind that. But again, that doesn't take away from the apartheid, the subjugation, the disproportionate killing, the disproportionate power dynamics, which are consistently erased in order to paper over what's actually happening in Palestine right now. It's illegal. It's apartheid in every sense of the word, and it's old school colonialism in many ways, and that is consistently undercut by powerful narratives because the United States and Israel have this close relationship.
In the land takeover and the fact that there's a contamination of water on the Palestinian side, and the fact that, this has become more and more radically right, even if it's rooted in some trauma. Maybe this is a government that has gotten further and further right and brought in voters that are further and further right than 25 years ago. So this is a political move. Let's not make this a nationalist. It's not even a nationalist move. It is a political move.
At the LD page points out to me is from South Africa that most South Africans in general consider Israel to be an apartheid state, and Mandela did in particular.
Yeah.
Well, and the assassination of Rabin was the impetus for this incredible. I mean, there were always these factions, but there is the left is on life support in Israel because these kinds of people have been validated, both just culturally in Israel and in the halls of the Knesset. There
was decades of bringing in particularly emigres from Russia and setting them up in the West Bank and colonizing the West Bank, trying to make so-called facts on the ground. Mm-hmm. And it has been also multiple U.S. presidencies that have in some instance, I think the Bush administration accelerated and exacerbated it. And then I think largely since then it's been neglect because I think Obama and even Trump to some extent probably just thought like this is intractable and we're not going to get messy with it, and so we just keep sending weapons. But this is supporters of Israel. And really, supporters of what Israel is doing have to contend with the fact that it's apartheid. And then, if you find that you can somehow justify an apartheid regime, that's on you. But it is an apartheid regime.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. They know in their hearts, many of these most hardcore hawkish supporters understand what this is, but they find the subjugation justifiable, and that's the uncomfortable reality of it. And that's the grossest. And so like when as Michael said, right, in that video that went everywhere, like it is not complicated. You look at the power dynamics and it's easy to discern if you don't have any sort of pre-existing bias about it.
Militant apathy. Megatron Sam. What's the alternative? I'm not sure what that's referred to. Aaron is not cool. Sam, you need some art in your home. Bare wall cedar. Yeah, I know that's true too. Bourbon socialist. If Rogan wants to use the I'm just a jerk-off comedian cop-out, he could easily just talk about MMA, smoking DMT, and his friends. That's exactly MMA at that point. However, he, for some reason, feels the need to comment on... I think there's two things. Honestly, I think there's two things. And I think I said this at the time when his first anti-COVID thing came out. One is going behind a paywall makes you irrelevant. You want to become culturally relevant again. You need to do something particularly controversial. And then I think the other is he's just sort of, he's a little bit ingrate. And he's surrounded by, you know, certain voices. And, you know, this makes him feel like he, you know, we said.
They're not fully behind a paywall, though. You can access his podcast for free with ads, I believe, on Spotify. Because Spotify, the app is free, but ads are frequent, I think, if you don't pay. I'm not sure because I'm a subscriber to Spotify, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just lazy. I haven't rethought it, but
I'm not going to rethink it. I got too many playlists.
Late stage Tom.
So many playlists.
Late stage Tom, Nomiki for press secretary. The Spruce Goose. It's crazy that on March 10th. It's crazy that on March 10th, 2020, Joe had Dr. Ulsterholm on his program. That's absolutely true. He was one of the earliest people to have Ulsterholm on. I remember that specifically. That's when the sort of like the inside information was like, oh my God, we're actually going to have a pandemic, as opposed to like, this is what's involved with the pandemic. What's amazing is he hasn't had him back on. That's what's genuinely amazing.
Is it amazing?
Well, I think it's telling.
Right.
I do think it's telling. And I would be surprised if he doesn't have him back on now, because there's going to have to be some like damage control. Socialist Bear, Disney tip, left is best. Always take the left-hand side in any mine. Right-hand bias makes the left side up to 20% faster. Line. Oh, interesting.
Any mine?
No, line. I'm going to take a picture of that right there.
Wait,
You literally just said that you don't take pictures of.
Well, how am I going to take? I get to take a screen grab of that, but then I got to transfer it over my phone. I want to remember that.
Oh, it's just amazing that you did that after denying that you did it earlier in the show. In the same
I'm not saying I never do it. I just don't do it as a regular practice. But in that instance, I wanted to.
You have sent me texts with pictures of a computer screen, 100%.
Well, it's just easier sometimes. All right. Everybody just calm down.
Your credibility is really in question.
Four more. Affluence wretched. Some of today's IMers really need to take a dropper of some sweet Sunset Lake CBD. Tim from Minneapolis. Regarding indigenous representation in Congress. There's a story out right now from just a couple of weeks ago that principal chief of the Cherokee Nation expressed optimism in an interview that aired Sunday that it will be able to see its delegates seated in Congress.
Wow.
That would be great. Madman Sam. It doesn't matter how many followers Rogan loses at this point. The IDW is funded by right-wing groups, Koch brothers, and in turn, now Rogan's show and Spotify is too. They're paying to have Peterson on, etc., to talk about how there's no such thing as climate, for example. They have endless money and easily can pop up his show even if he loses half his listeners. They don't need a return on investment just as long as they get their right-wing narrative out. Well, the thing is that Spotify does need a return on its investment. And so there is an opportunity. Maybe they get worried about it. Plus, we saw this in the context. It really didn't do much in the end. But there was a holding company. I can't remember what holding company it was that owned one of the gun manufacturers after Newtown. And the guy who owned it, or was the chief, maybe shareholder, his dad or mom lived in Newtown. And it became a personal embarrassment for them. And supposedly they divested from. I got to revisit that story, but it didn't have that much of an impact in the final analysis. Stoby2375. AMR crew, enjoy listening to the show and interviews and exposure to interesting knowledge guests. Emma Jordy report Thursdays is a nice one-day break from Sam, and it's pronounced Nomiki. R.I.P. Michael Brooks. Can I get a shofar plus the Matt Leck shofar? Left is best. Talia for Tampa, read in Kermit voice. But Sam, acting based off what others need strips our individuality away. And for what? Just so we can help ensure the survival of our neighbors. Communist mentality. And the final IM of the day. John, need LEC vision TM soon.
And just a quick update before we end the show. Manchin says that Build Back Better is dead. So there's that.
Oh, it's up to him. Love that.
Yeah. What Build Back Better, Bill? I don't know what you guys are talking about. And he said, no, it's dead. So there's some optimism.
Maybe they call it something else.
DOA, how about that? I don't care what you call it. Just get it passed.
Dead on arrival. They'd have to call it the Manchin largesse bill or something like that. Matt, Bradley, Nomi, Emma, great job today. See you folks tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there.